In this episode, we unpack why 80% of AI initiatives fail and what it takes to join the 20% that succeeds. Our guest today is Melissa Reeve, an author of the upcoming book, Hyperactive, Rewiring the Organization to Become an AI Native Enterprise. Over the past 18 months, she studied how leaders at FedEx, Unilever, and JP Morgan Chase are using AI not just as a tool, but as transformation playbook. If you're a founder, a manager, or someone who wants to lead in the world of AI, this conversation will give you the roadmap. Hey, welcome to AI Revolution Digest, where businesses get smarter. I'm Jesslyn, and I'm going to show you how AI drives real results. And because the future is awaiting, let's dive right in. 80% of AI initiatives fail. The real question is, how do you make sure yours succeed? In order to answer this question, let's welcome our very special guest for today, Miss Melissa Reeves. Ma'am, thank you for being here. Can you tell our listeners who are you and what is it that you do?
Hi, it's such a pleasure to be here, and it is an honor to be talking with you. As you indicated, I'm Melissa Reeve, and I'm the creator of the hyper-adaptive model, which I like to say deals with the human side of AI. So people, processes, and roles are going to be impacted and changed with AI. And so how do we get from where we are today into the
So my
future?
question now is, he said 80% fail. So most probably people would say, what's that? Everyone's pouring so much money into AI. Everyone is talking about AI and initiatives. So why is that 80% fail? Is it because the technology is new or what else is driving it?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I'm sure there's a multitude of factors, but I think a lot of it is around, at this point in time, it is around the people. So whether we are not aligned around the use case, like I've read examples of AI initiatives where they built this beautiful AI tool and nobody used it. Or they had a great idea for an AI tool, and then they realized that the data can't support it. And I think a lot of the AI initiatives on a global scale, and when I say a global scale, I'm talking about we rolled out ChatGPT to all of our employees, and yet we're not at $30 a head or whatever it is, and they're not using it. And I feel like that is a true people problem. And it isn't because of lack of training. They might have sent people through, for example, training on Copilot. When you think about AI, AI is a creativity problem. So if you asked somebody to draw, like let's say we just asked you to draw a cat and we asked me to draw a cat, we would draw totally different cats because we have this vision of what a cat is in our heads. And the same thing happens with AI. You've got to leverage your creativity in order to develop a prompt to get things done. And so when you're thinking about these failures and the failure rates, what you're really trying to do is you're trying to spur learning and creativity. And it's a totally different way of learning than, say, learning mathematics, which is a lot of theory. This is all application. It's much more like drawing the cat than it is about learning
So what
math.
you said was very interesting on how it's not like maths where there's a formula like A plus B equals C. You said it's a people's problem. You're talking about creativity and innovation. I'm just looking back now on how my education started or how we were educated where we just sit in a classroom. The teacher talks down to us and tells us what to do. And I came from a culture where talking back or giving feedback to a professor might be seen as disrespectful or I don't have the right because I'm a sub. So my question is, in an environment like that, how do you make sure that your people are safe enough to fail? Because you're talking about activity, we're going to fail at some point. How do we make sure that we make our people safe enough to give us feedback while making sure we can go to our boss and say, is this might be an expensive thing. We might not see the results as quickly, but it's worthwhile for the long term. So I'm asking this question because this is what managers are often faced with this dilemma where they want their employees to feel safe. At the end, you have a boss they need to answer to.
So this points to psychological safety and Amy Edmondson, and how do you start to create an environment where people feel like they can make mistakes, where people feel like they can not only make those mistakes, but not get blamed. And so you really have to understand how to create that. And it starts with leaders modeling that behavior and indicating to the people around them that it's okay for them to make mistakes. One of the ways they can do that is by admitting their own mistakes. So when you're in a leadership position and you start to admit your own mistakes, that opens the door for other people to make their mistakes. So creating that psychological safety is so critical. And then I think the other part that I heard you talk about, which is how do we learn in class, like in a classroom setting, it's what I like to call a sage on the stage. So you have one person who's broadcasting information to everybody else. And the way AI really works, it's more about social learning. And so, how do you learn socially from your peers? And now we're talking about creating a learning arena, which is just a space for us all to learn together that feels safe. So there's the third thing I want to address. So you didn't realize you were asking a three-part question. But the third part is if you are in a traditional society that's very hierarchical, how do you start to address the first two things we said? How do you create that psychological safety? How do you create a new way of learning? And the example we talked about before we hit the record button was from Japan. And Japan is a very hierarchical society. And yet, the Toyota production system is an environment, a way of working in which anybody can provide feedback, where anybody can pull what's called the andon cord, which is a way to stop the whole production line if anybody in the organization sees something that is wrong. It's also an advocate of Kaizen, which is continuous improvement. And the way they've set up the systems is that anybody in the organization can provide feedback in the spirit of continuous improvement. And so you can see how this very hierarchical society has been able to inject exactly what you were talking about: innovation, feedback, and all voices heard despite the
So
hierarchy.
my question now is with Toyota, you give an example that was a manufacturing space. They were in a factory, they can pull something to make sure everything stops and the subordinate can tell their leaders like, hey, something's wrong. That's why I stopped the production to make sure everything is high quality. So my question now is how does this look like in an office? And you said Kaizen where it's continuous learning. How do we implement it in an office setting that people are safe and can give feedback?
Yeah, so thanks for asking the question. So before I studied AI, I studied Agile. And I studied Agile, which is a traditional software development methodology in the context of marketing. And so from that perspective, I understand how these systems of continuous improvement, how feedback loops can be created in environments. And it isn't about destroying the hierarchy per se, but it is about integrating dedicated feedback systems in the office. So, for example, we had what we called funnels, and those funnels are intake funnels where anybody could propose an idea, an improvement, and the feedback loops were happening at every level of the organization. So, your team would have a retrospective and they would come up with improvement items. And then teams of teams would vote on those improvement items and decide which ones would be good for that set of teams or for that departments. And then departments could escalate their improvement items because what you're trying to do is you're trying to implement systems thinking. So thinking about that system as a whole and thinking about what improvement items are local and what improvement items affect everybody in the organization. And so it's all about putting those types of systems in place. And then, of course, acting on the feedback back and ideas that we're
What
getting.
you said was very interesting because in a traditional company, you would break up the company not according to their value, but according to their function. Meaning, are you in the marketing department, finance department? And I would say that's easy to do compared to if you were to be in a bank, because banks are highly regulated. They have the central bank telling them this is exactly or strictly what they're supposed to do. So my question is, if you're a company in an industry that's highly regulated, how do you implement the systems thinking with
Mhm.
yeah,
A
system
system like
thinking?
this.
Like I'm asking this question because he said that you've studied banks like JP Morgan Chase. So what is it that these banks do that others can follow?
Well, it is interesting, and I get this a lot, especially as I'm talking about AI. There's some people who are like, "Oh, well, that couldn't work for me. I'm in a highly regulated industry." And yet, when I was researching for my upcoming book called Hyperadaptive, and we'll talk about more in a minute, but the banks kept coming up. So JP Morgan Chase has been integrating AI since 2016. Bank of America, they hold 8,700 patents around AI. And the thing about highly regulated industries is that, yes, there are constraints, no doubt about it. But those constraints include things like traceability. And things like traceability are not inconsistent with what I was talking about. If you have these things called feedback loops and they're going at every level, you simply need to record, right? And be able to say, here's what we're doing, here's why we're doing it, and have that level of accountability baked in.
So my question now is you're gonna publish a book and you spend like 18 months researching. So that's a huge commitment. What was the personal moment in your experience that made you say, I need to write this book?
Yeah. So this one came fast. I mean, it's my first one, so it's not like I've written a lot of books, but I was thinking about AI and especially AI in marketing. And I thought to myself, eventually we are going to have agents that deliver campaigns from end to end. And I was calling it an automated execution pipeline at that time. And it made me think that this isn't the first time we've experienced this. And I turned to something called DevOps, which is how software development gets built and deployed. And basically, what they did is instead of having a bunch of handoffs, so somebody writes the software, somebody reviews the software, somebody tests the software, somebody deploys the software, they said, let's automate that pipeline. And that's essentially what DevOps is you're automating software delivery so you can deploy. I mean, Amazon deploys 23,000 times an hour, I think. And so I saw that same thing was going to happen to other parts of the organization. So I started to do the research and read about DevOps, but also surface the patterns of leading companies like JP Morgan, like FedEx, like Unilever. And around that, I wrote the book Hyperadaptive, which is rewiring the enterprise to become AI native.
So my question now is you've studied FedEx, Unilever, JP Morgan. What was the most counterintuitive move that they made that you believe more leaders should copy?
I don't know if it's counterintuitive, but I think it speaks to what we were saying earlier, which is AI learning is social learning. And in order to truly be effective deploying AI, need to be able to activate your people. So, for example, Moderna, which is a pharmaceutical company, I think they got their renown during COVID because they were one of the companies that were able to get the vaccine out the door in part because of AI. So they had a prompting contest, and through that prompting contest, they identified 100 of their superstars. And then they had those superstars go out into the organization and teach other people how to be superstars. And all of a sudden, you started to get this momentum around these people who had a lot of enthusiasm for AI. Then what they did is they built an online community where those practices could be shared. And eventually they had over 2,000 people a week engaging in that community. And you can see how this becomes a grassroots movement throughout the organization. And it was supported at the top.
So my question now would be, it's very easy for big companies to do these grassroots movements because there's most probably since you're a big company, you'll probably get the best talents out there. The ones that are very motivated to do what's the biggest thing. But my question now is if you're not a huge company like Moderna or JP Morgan, how would you emulate the same grassroots level when your company is like quite small? And yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I do feel like learning has been democratized.
Mhm.
And maybe if you are building your own LLM, there's a war for talent around AI engineers. But in terms of improving your own workflow, maybe you're in finance, maybe you're in legal, maybe you're in these other parts of the organization. There's so much out there on YouTube. You can ask ChatGPT to help teach you. In fact, right now I'm trying to learn more about computer programming because I come from this marketing background and yet I want to vibe code things. And so I'm having Google Learn teach me about computer programming so I can understand those things.
So my question now would be, you said that learning has been democratized. We can go to ChatGPT, ask questions. You're using YouTube to learn about programming. My question now would be, what do you believe should now change in education or the way we're
Yeah,
learning?
it's a great question, and I appreciate you asking it because I'm passionate about it. And so many people feel like using ChatGPT is cheating. And yes, there will be students who will use it to generate the answers. I think teachers should say, go ahead. Go ahead and have AI teach you or show you the answer or create the answer. And your job is to analyze the output. So use your critical thinking hat. Did AI hallucinate? How do you know it didn't hallucinate? What else could you have asked it to have gotten a different answer? In a way, it almost makes it harder because AI is going to deliver you information that may or may not be correct. And so I feel like education needs to really double down on critical thinking skills so that we understand the output of AI more than ever.
I think that's difficult knowing that it's our human nature to be lazy because it's just how our brain works, where we just want to conserve energy, so we do the bare minimum. So my question now is, a lot of people are saying, okay, AI is lazy, it's making us lazy, it's making us dumb. There was a research paper shown by MIT on how if we're hyper dependent on AI, our brain activities are decreasing. So there's a lot of people saying AI. I just gonna tell to my audience, it's being cracked down. So this is one thing about AI or the new tool is even though it's making things more efficient, it can always fail. That's what has been doing right now as we were recording. So I think the reason why I brought this up is to show people that it's not perfect. These new technologies, we need to learn how to deal with that going offline. So I'm saying this because there's a lot of people are saying we have this AI agent. We can automate everything. Just like what you said when you were starting this book, we're doing like an end-to-end thing where we can automate the whole marketing funnel. Well, technology fails. So my question now would, with all this AI out there, it's gonna be harder for us to put a pause when something's not going right. Or I believe we're putting too much trust in automated systems that we might forget how to do things manually in case that fails. So my question is, do you have any framework on how we're able to deal with that?
Yeah. So the book that I've written really talks about how enterprises exist today. And I refer to them as linear organizations, right? You have strategy to execution, you have concept to delivery, and you typically have layers, right? Layers of hierarchy, strategy to execution, layers of handoffs as you go from concept to delivery. And I believe that AI will compress both of those dimensions into an organization of orchestrated AI value streams that can sense and respond at the speed of markets. Now, that doesn't imply that everything is being automated without humans in the loop. What it does imply is that jobs will change and will change. And first of all, let me say that I believe jobs are made of tasks, processes, decisions, and human interactions. So what we need to do is we need to deconstruct jobs so that we understand what AI can and cannot do within our tasks, processes, decisions, and human interactions. My guess is they'll be good at doing some tasks. And we know from factory automation that not everything is automatable, right? Only 1% of the world's factories are completely automated. And McKinsey says about 34% of activities within factories will never be able to be automated. And so I believe that a similar thing will happen with AI. Is we need to parse out what AI can and can't do. And then people will move from doing some of these tasks to building, monitoring, and maintaining the automations. They don't maintain themselves. The models are always changing. And so that's what the new roles will start to look like. And on top of that, we'll need to build really sophisticated telemetry to monitor the AI so that we understand when it's going off the rails or hallucinating. And we need to keep humans in the loop at critical stages.
So my question now would be, for example, you're in a bank.
Mhm.
Well, if AI is gonna hallucinate because you're dealing with people's money, right? Or you're dealing with their names and for that it goes to the right person. You don't want to just wake up one morning with $1 million that doesn't belong to you and you're, oh my God, where did the money come from? I want to make sure that it's clean money, it's not laundered. So my question now would be, do you have any framework where every employee can implement it on their day-to-day tasks to keep in check on, you know what, AI is efficient, but it can hallucinate or
Yeah.
something that people can follow?
Well, I'm going to say yes and no. First of all, I want to clarify everything you're talking about right now already happens, right?
Okay.
So money goes into the wrong accounts, dirty money happens. So this is not an AI problem, it's a current problem that AI might be able to help us solve. I think the second thing is the power of AI and humans together. And the example I'd like to share is about distributing loans. So this is an example out of China, and it's a Chinese bank. And when it was just humans reviewing loans, they reviewed the 12 criteria. And the default rate, I think, was something around 12%. When AI alone evaluated the criteria, they were able to evaluate 72 criteria, and the default rate fell to about 6%. When AIs and humans worked together, so AI did its pass and then humans did their pass, the default rate fell to 3%. And so I think it's an excellent example of humans and AI working together and the power that that creates. And I think the important things is for humans not to abdicate their power to AI. And I know that's a slightly different example. You were saying, how can an individual figure out what they should automate and what they shouldn't? And I think you answered your own question, which is if there's a level of sensitivity, so you've got to reevaluate your decision frameworks. If a large amount of money can be lost, if somebody's life is at stake, we need to be very, very careful about turning those decisions over to AI to just automate.
So you said on how I'm gonna go to somewhere where there's more sensitive. We're talking about money, then a while ago you talked about someone's life. So I'm just curious on, have you seen on or studied any companies, especially in the medical field? Because that's very sensitive. We're dealing with doctors and a lot of things can go wrong, and that's where life or death situations occur. So my question is, studied any organizations or something you want to share?
Sure. So I think there's obvious administrative things that can be handled. So the Cleveland Clinic is a world-renowned medical facility here in the States, and their doctors were getting weighed down with creating notes from their patient interaction. And that was just a wonderful example of AI being able to listen in on these conversations and generate notes that these doctors were having to do on nights and weekends. And so patient satisfaction went up because the doctors weren't distracted typing. The doctors were happier, they were less stressed out. So even within healthcare, there's a lot of administrative overhead that can be handled by AI. When we go into things like diagnosing and diagnosing cancer, we're currently running many, many tests. And it's similar to the banking where AI alone can't do it. It spots a lot. Humans alone can't do it, but AI and humans together are getting more and more accurate at things like diagnosis.
What you said was interesting, especially with the doctor's note, because I forgot the exact statistics. There was research that shows that, for example, you're in a hospital, doctor says you got an injury, you need to stay here for, I don't know, a week. And he
Mhm,
said most of the misdiagnosis happens is when doctors exchange notes. It's like the morning, they need to give the notes to the one that's going to go in the evening. So a lot of administrative tasks where doctors are overworked. I would say they're underpaid as well with the type of work that they're doing, especially nurses. And that's why a lot of patients get misdiagnosed. They have the wrong dosage, or they're supposed to receive a medicine or not receive a medicine, but they did because one, it's either the doctor, they're very exhausted from the work, so they weren't able to tell to the teammates properly on how to handle the other patient,
mhm.
or they have a bad handwriting. I know it's a meme out there that doctors have bad handwriting. So I think it really makes sense. And what you're saying is there's some small changes that we can do, that we can have AI help us, but it has huge impact. Just like what your example was saying, this knows this patient charts. No doctor likes to do it, but it's very important because it can help save the patient's life, especially when you're in ICU. So I think it's going back to your earlier point is knowing the values of your task. Small as writing a patient's chart. Nobody wants to do it. No doctor wants to do it, and no nurses want to do it. Everyone hates doing it. However, the value is huge because by doing small change, it can make or break someone's life. And just like what you said on how AI and humans can have huge potential when we know how to work together. For I would say for a bank, most of the non-performing loans are at 10%. So the fact that they're able to make it down to 3%, that's like amazing. That's gonna make everyone day. So my question now is, what was the hardest call you ever had to do when were doing your research? So do you need to walk away from a case study, or were there parts of the book you decided to leave out? So can you tell us what was the challenge when you were doing this research?
It's a great question. And I think the hardest part was really finding the companies that exemplified good AI usage. There's so much noise out there around AI, and there's isolated use cases. But to truly find those companies who've been doing it a really long time. So there's a company out of China called Pengon. Well, I wish I knew the characters, but I don't. But the Romanized spelling of it is Pengan. And they first in 2008 started to work on their data strategy and getting their data house in order. And originally they just dealt in insurance. And over the years, so it's been, 17 years now, a long time, they have not only branched out into insurance, but also health insurance and health care. And they created this dynamic ecosystem built on an individual's data. And I feel like I list them in stage 5, kind of these orchestrated value streams that I talked about. What it showed me is, one, that there are leading organizations out there, that two, this notion of orchestrated value streams is validated. And yet it took a lot to find examples like.
So my question now is, if you were to go back in time and advise yourself when you were about to embark in this project of yours, what's one warning you'd give her?
It's another great question. I would just say, nothing's as easy as it looks, and it takes a lot of perseverance. So hang in there; it'll happen.
I mean, it's happening now. You're going to publish your book soon, and you have an AI management strategy company. So I think you're going to do well. So my question now is, you talk about stages, like 5 stages of AI. And before we had this call, you said most companies even fail in the first stage. So can you share to our listeners what's the 5 stages in a nutshell, and why most people just fail on the first step?
Yeah, and thanks for the question. So we talked about the linear organization going from linear to hyper-adaptive, and we do that through 5 key stages. And we start by laying the foundation. We move into injecting AI into our tasks. Then we take a look at agentic AI. So that's really coordinating those tasks into some sort of pipeline. And we do that at a small scale before we grow that into multiple agentic work streams in a large organization. And then the 5th stage is these orchestrated value streams, where instead of organizing by a hierarchy, we organize a value stream is just a fancy word for essentially a customer journey. So the example I give, we've been talking a lot about banking. So maybe there's that quote unquote value stream around young adults and their banking needs. And so you put everybody who's involved in that on essentially the same team, or you fund that value stream. But the part that people get wrong, or they don't really take into account, is the support structures that you need to go from one stage to the next. So in the beginning, you need dynamic governance. You need to identify your AI leads and champions. A lot of people have done this. Like, they have governance, but they don't have dynamic governance. They have AI leads, but they don't have programmatic support for those AI leads. They are thinking about agentic AI, but they're not thinking about how they're going to support people as their jobs and roles are changing. And that's through something I call an AI impact hub. They're thinking about orchestrating agents, but they're not thinking about the telemetry engines they need to be in place. And I feel like that's why organizations are falling down right now, is they've just got the little tip of the iceberg of things that they're supposed to be doing, but they haven't really thought about AI, the human side of AI, in a programmatic, systematic way.
So you said on how a lot of companies are putting on money, billions of dollars in AI, and you're saying we can't just solve a problem by just putting money into it. And I think that's how most managers think, that if you just throw money, it's going to solve all problems. What we're saying is we need to support our people to make sure they get people to do the transition. They need to be in an environment where it's safe, where they can give their feedback of something's not working. And I think the most important point you said, we talk about China, we talk about Japan. These are very hierarchy, top-down cultures, and yet we're able to strive through innovation. And we're talking about medicine industry, the medical healthcare industry, and we also talk about the banks. The reason why I specifically focus on those industries because people were saying, hey, we can't be that innovative because we're very regulated. And now you're saying that's not true. So it all boils down to whether or not the leaders wanted and decide that they want to do this culture change in the organization and to give their people support. And it doesn't matter which industry you are, it doesn't matter which stage of the maturity you are in our company, it's about your actions as a leader. So what we're really saying, this is a leadership test that yes, it's true. AI is there. There's going to be new technologies, but what we're seeing is going to separate the good leaders and the not so great ones because it shows more about the mindset they are in when they're in a leadership position. And just like what you said, it's not a technological issue and why companies fail to roll their AI. It's more about the human issue. So my question now is, if you were to give advice, just one advice to any CEO out there that's listening, that you really hope that they take into action, what would that be?
Well, I think it's the knowledge that everything's going to change, including leadership. And you as a leader, everything that got you here isn't going to get you there. So what got you to your position is most likely your technical skill, whether that's being a great lawyer, being a great at finance, being a sharp legal mind, and your people skills. And unfortunately, those people skills are often tied up with ego and power dynamics. How much budget do I control? How many people do I control? And that narrative is going to change. So leadership is no longer going to be about the budget you control and the people you control. It's how well can you get alignment? How well can you orchestrate the different parts and pieces? How well can you coach individuals in a dynamic and changing environment? How well can you as a leader sense changes and align the rest of your leadership teams around those changes? Those are the skills that you're going to need in the rest of this century. And that's going to require you giving up some things that you have known and loved for probably many, many years.
Well, just like what if you love something, you need to learn how to let them go. Just like what you said earlier, 20th century to go from 20th century to be the best in the 21st century. There's some things that need to, and as a leader, you always need to be adaptable to those changes, or else you'll be left behind. And I guess what you're saying is leadership is not the title. I think most people we tend to confuse that. Hey, I'm the president. I'm the best leader. And what we're saying with all this AI initiatives, we're saying that leadership is a mindset that even people at the grassroots level can employ. So a while ago, you talked about on how these huge companies, the top support the grassroots level, but the one that really starts, the superstars of this AI initiatives are people on the front line. And I would assume they must be the frontliners would be the best ones because they deal with the problems face to face. Unlike if you're a C-suite, you're more detached to the problem. So I think that that's a good example to show that leadership is a mindset that you're there to empower others and it's not an ego thing. Like hopefully more and more people would learn this and probably banking sector because I don't know if you know this. There's a trend in TikTok. It's called the finance bros. Like all those guys,
Really?
they can show on how arrogant they are and oh, this is how much bonus I I got for this year. Therefore, I'm better than you. But I realized on how I think it's a culture. where if you're in the banking industry in 80s and 90s, that's like the height, the golden age of greed in the, and how I think we need to have that humility to make sure that we need to change. I was talking to other CEOs as well, and I'm going to share this because a lot of people in the management level will say that the millennials and the Gen Zs are the laziest ones or the harder to be aligned. So my question, my question to them is, perhaps you're not guiding us, or you're not doing a communication or feedback loop with us on how do you get us to align to your vision. Or perhaps you're just like your example of the cat, that if you're to draw a cat, our version is different. So perhaps as a leader, your version of success or what you believe is going to drive me is different from what I want. So I think that question of we just lack communication. It's a lack of communication skills that kills any relationships. I know you often talk about this in love, like if you go to your coaches, this it's often the lack of communication. But throughout this podcast, we're actually saying, aside from the romantic side of love of life, we also see on how communication failures, failing to give feedback, failing to have an environment where you can feel safe, it destroys our careers as well. I know it's a big thing to say it's going to destroy our careers, but 80% of initiatives fail. So that can be as a leader. If you come to the boss saying, I need, I don't know, 2 million budget for this, and it fails, right? So I think that
Yeah, and I think we're seeing the intersection of organizational structures and the change of that. So when you think about the arc of organizational structures, and I like to say the organizational structure that got you here isn't going to get you there. And the management, siloed, bureaucratic management of many large organizations first started with Taylorism back in 1911, and then got the silos, the functional specializations, got codified right after World War II. And we think about that war and the military and the hierarchical nature of the military kind of bled over into our organizations. And I personally don't believe that that organizational structure will survive the age of AI. And so I think to your point, money is culture. So how we distribute money influences culture. And right now we distribute it at the top to individuals at the top, and it gives them power. The other thing that we do is we incentivize people at the top in a quarterly short-term way. And I feel like as the hierarchy changes into these orchestrated value streams, the career ladders collapse. And so what happens when career ladders collapse is we start to build more of a portfolio of experiences, and we're judged against that portfolio of experiences rather than promotions. And so your portfolio, what you've done, grows bigger and bigger and bigger. And AI can facilitate more holistic feedback loops around your activity. So rather than having one manager who gives you an annual review that might have recency bias, AI can ping everybody on your team and say, hey, you guys just delivered XYZ initiative. You know, how did Melissa do? And you get that 360-degree feedback, and it asks that maybe every few weeks. And all of a sudden, you get a much more comprehensive view of your work and how you're doing. And I feel like, to bring it back to the generations, I can see individuals, maybe in Gen A, Gen Z, you know, whatever generation, younger generation, that being much more fulfilling than climbing a corporate ladder, burning yourself out just to have some ego and prestige.
well, most people, there are some people who are always going to be like that, but just like what you said, it's not the we're wanted to have more why we're doing things. Like that's the reason why I agree with your point where the value systems. I want to know how valuable is my task to reach the company's goal, not necessarily because of the title. And what is most important where at the below level, if you're an entry level, the type of skill set you're looking at or what you need would change as you go up the pyramid. And what we're seeing now is with AI, the more important it is that we are very empathetic to people, the more important it is to have the right mindset of leadership, because you need to take the shots of what's right and what's wrong in a split second. And this is what the military is great at because you have people's lives at risk. So leaders should know how to do what's right and what's wrong. So my question now is, you said most of our organizational structure is very siloed, is very top down. We got that from the spilled over. And now with AI, you're saying it needs to change. So my question now is, have you done any studies in the military on how they're changing in the AI? That because I'm asking this because I think the military is good at leadership. I think going through the military is the best leadership school out there. So I'm just curious on if you have any studies on that or.
Well, I'm thinking of the book Leaders Eat Last, which is about the military and about how when you're in the military and you are a leader, you really should be eating last, because these lives are in your hands and your primary concern should be about your team. And so I feel like that's a good book to reference. And then Turn the Ship Around is another one about military leadership empowering their individuals on, it was a nuclear submarine. So I'm not citing any researcher stories, but those are, I think, two powerful books about how leadership in the military, and again, they're not about AI either, but I think it points to what we're talking about here.
Yeah, so even though it's not about AI, they're in an extreme scenario where everything's volatile, everything's uncertain. Sometimes they're going to a place where they can have a plan, but a lot of things can go wrong. So I think the reason why I'm asking for the military because they're in the most extreme example of ambiguity. Everything's changing so fast and a lot of at risk. At a company level, it might not be that extreme, but with AI, things are changing fast. So I think the more reason we need to have good leadership role. I think a lot of the research now that's happening is how to upskill employees, but I haven't really seen the research on how to help managers become better leaders. I think that's what we're lacking now because when something goes wrong, it's easy to say, oh, it's people down there that are not doing it right. And that's why we've seen a lot of research on upskilling employees, making sure they're great. Where are the initiatives to make our leaders better? So I think that's more of a leadership organization question. So thank you so much for being here. So before we leave, hit a 1 minute game is just enter or questions. You're gonna play 1 minute. You don't need to think about it. It's just for fun. So just let me know when you're ready. Then I'm gonna start the timer.
Let's go.
Okay. First question: love or career?
Love.
Save or spend?
Save.
Morning person or night owl?
In between.
Introvert or extrovert?
In between.
Between everything. Okay. Wine or coffee?
Wine.
I've heard you can mix both. I don't know if that's true. Haven't tried it. Movie
Oh,
or book?
weird. Book
Movie
all day.
or call?
Oh, say that again.
Would you rather text someone or call someone?
Call.
City life or province life?
Province.
Beach or mountain?
I live in the mountains, so I guess mountains.
Last question. Money or power?
Money.
Yes, really. Just like what you said, with money, it's a cultural thing. So money change in the world and make sure that it goes through the right change. So thank you, Melissa, for being here. So before we go, is there something you want to promote? Just talk about.
Well, just if what we shared today is of interest to you, a lot of it, the details of it are in the upcoming book, Hyperadaptive: Rewiring the Enterprise to Become AI Native. You can join the wait list at my website, hyperadaptive.solutions/book. And I'm here to support organizations who are struggling with this AI integration. And always happy to connect on LinkedIn and have a chat.
Yes, thank you everyone for listening, and make sure to read Melissa's book or have a consultancy for her to make sure that you're on the 20% that does succeed in your projects. Right? So thank you everyone for being here and see you in our next episode. Goodbye.